Christian Smith is a sociologist at the University of Notre Dame who commented last month on his concerns that college students are too easily offended by words that set off feelings, calling out a culture of offense that shuts down the open exchange of ideas and accountability to reason and argument. His point is that perpetual nervousness over "did I say that right?" closes conversations more than opens them. Brett Stevens wrote in the New York Times last year that when we get to college, the dominant mode of politics is identity politics, in which the primary test of an argument isn't the quality of the thinking, but the cultural, racial, or sexual standing of the person making it. In recent years, identity politics have become the moated castles from which we safeguard our feelings from hurt and our opinions from challenge. It is our safe space, but it is a safe space from thought, he writes, rather than a safe space for thought. A university should be the place, students, where you become gritty as your ideas are challenged, your paradigms are expanded, and your arguments are sharpened because you regularly encounter opposing viewpoints and even ideas that make you uncomfortable. A university should help you get outside of yourselves and learn from others whose stories and contexts are very different from your own. This is how ideas are worked out, and this is how conversations flourish. As John Stuart Mill once wrote back in the 1800s, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. His reasons may be good, and no one may have been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either option." Sadly, so many of today's campuses are losing the ability to encounter others, to listen and learn from differences without feeling personally offended or attacked. Playing out in many universities seems to be a trend more towards education as therapeutic than education as transformational. I want Biola to model the transformational way, where we engage in ideas with as much intellectual rigor and biblical truth as we do with Christian grace and old-fashioned hospitality. And that's why we're having this conversation today. We're a community that is united around the cross of Christ. We love each other, or we should. We're committed to the authority of Scripture, and we submit to that authority. But the interesting thing is that a shared commitment to the truth of God's Word doesn't always translate into a uniformity of ideas. So we need to keep pressing into how we know truth and articulate it with persuasion, allowing Scripture to be our guide as we wrestle through the complexity of issues. Students, and all of us for that matter, what I believe we need to see more at Biola is how we model healthy disagreement based on reasoned ideas. Because amidst our differences, we belong to the same Lord, and therefore we belong to each other. So this year I've proposed that we initiate these sorts of conversations through open assemblies. Dr. Langer will talk in a few minutes about the first such forum, but today I want to set the stage for how we model our differences by arguing with the most articulate ideas. And students, you need to see this done well, taking the best ideas with intellectual rigor and the art of persuasion and framing them into what we need to call dialogues of grace. As Christians, we should be able to speak into the big issues of the day with confidence and with courage because we believe we have truth claims that are verifiable. As Christians, we should care about getting this right. But as we argue our ideas, we should also preserve our relationships. Truth and grace are intrinsic values. We hold them both highly. And amidst the anger defining so much of our culture, we must model deep Christian thinking and genuine Christ-like kindness. So our outcomes for this chapel are simply three. I want us to understand how we frame the problem of polarization and unhealthy discourse. I want us to feel invited into that conversation that aims towards biblical solutions. And I want us to grasp tools that can help get us there, including the tools to maintain healthy relationships amidst our deep disagreements. Joining us this morning to talk big picture about conversing Christianly in a combative culture are Dr. Rick Langer, Professor of Biblical Studies and Theology, Dr. Tamara Anderson, Professor of Psychology, and Dr. Tim Muehlhoff, Professor of Communications. As they come to the stage, they want this recent video clip to help set the stage.
It's about freedom of speech. It's about celebration. So what we are going to do is something you're not used to, and we're going to give you 2 minutes of our platform to put your message out. Now, whether they disagree or agree with your message is irrelevant. It's the fact that you have the right to have the message.
I am an American. And the beauty of America is that when you see something broke in your country, you can mobilize to fix it. So you ask why there's a Black Lives Matter? Because you can watch a black man die and be choked to death on television and nothing happened. We need to address that. You need to fix it. We are not anti-cop. We are anti-bad cop. We don't want handouts. We don't want anything that's yours. We want our God-given right to freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I want to leave you with this, and I'm gone. You're right, my brother. You're right. You are so right. All lives matter, right? But when a black life is lost, we get no justice. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. If we really want to make America great, we do it together.
I feel like we made progress. I feel like two sides that never listened to each other actually made progress today. Did I expect to go on that stage? No. I expected to come down here, stand here with my fist in the air in a very militant way and to exchange insults, maybe some dirty looks or who knows what. If not on a grander level, but just person to person, you know, I think we really made some substantial steps without either side yielding anything. Yeah. I hope that they understand that one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement is a proud American and a Christian who cares deeply about this country, who cares deeply about the people in it, whether they are documented or not. A man who controls a 4,000-member militia shook my hand and said, I always knew I identified with you, but today solidified it. Wow. One of the heads of Bikers for Trump came up and shook my hand, asked me to take a picture with his son. A little blonde-haired kid named Jacob. Like, that's special. Like, here I went from being their enemy to someone they want to take pictures with their children, and that's the power of communication. We came out, we were going to chant, we were going to do a demonstration, but we didn't have to. We just spoke, and it worked. I'm happy about that.
As a person who studies communication and teaches communication, that surprised me. That greatly surprised me. It could have gone south in a heartbeat. right? And was that just a perfect storm of a Trump rally organizer who had goodwill offering 2 minutes, let alone 2 seconds, to a representative from Black Lives Matter movement? And when the person was given the stage, decided to tone back the rhetoric, decided to offer an olive branch to the audience. So is it that it just happened to be lucky that day, that it worked and had some positive results, or is there a way that we can construct healthy conversations? And let me just say this as a Christian, if they can pull it off, as Christians, we should be able to pull it off. We should be able to speak the truth in love as we talk about really difficult conversations in a church setting or a university setting. But how will that happen? From a communication standpoint, communication theorists would say that perspective taking is really the central skill that we need if we're going to have happy, productive conversations. When I was doing my master's thesis at UNC Chapel Hill, and isn't it great that they're going to be Duke in Chapel Hill on Thursday if God is faithful? That was an aside. A culture war broke out on campus between the conservative Christian groups on campus and the gay and lesbian groups on campus. It was a culture war. It got national attention. I decided in my master's thesis to try to bring together the two groups. Let's bring together 3 representatives of the conservative Christian groups, and let's bring together 3 self-identified gay and lesbian participants, and could they have a productive conversation? Now listen, it would have been disastrous if we just took them, put them in a room, and said, okay, talk among yourselves. We know how that would have ended. Right? It would have been going after each other. It would have been hostile communication. So we asked if they would agree to 5 weeks of preparation to have that conversation. And they did perspective-taking exercises. And at the end, they did have the conversation at our house, my wife made dinner, she left, and she said, protect the china, right? Kind of an attitude. But it was productive, and every single one of the participants said this was a productive conversation. So is it possible at a university setting for faculty who disagree with each other on certain issues to have productive conversations? The answer, I think, from a communication standpoint is yes, but there's going to be some hard work that has to be done on the front end of that in order to have these good, productive conversations. Perspective taking, by the way, is highly supported in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament. For example, in the Old Testament, you get the book of Proverbs. Proverbs 18:13 says it is folly and shameful to speak before listening. Interesting that the ancient writer would attach shame to the fact if you speak before listening. I love Proverbs 14:12 that says there is a way that seems right to a man. The first step in good communication is to understand, how did you arrive at this conclusion? The Harvard Negotiation Project says the biggest mistake we make in talking to each other is we only trade conclusions. We don't share how we arrived at the conclusion. I love the book of Ecclesiastes that says, listen, I want you to imagine, I want you to do perspective taking of what life would look under the sun, which means there is no God. There is no transcendent anything. In the New Testament, we get some interesting passages. The writer of Hebrews says that I want you not only to pray for those in prison, but I want you to pray as if you were there yourself. I want you to remember those being mistreated as if you felt their own pain in your body. And then later the ancient writer would say, and Jesus, by the way, can sympathize with us. In the Greek, that word sympathy means knowledge by way of common experience. So we want to try a grand experiment here at Biola. We want to have good, productive, passionate conversations. And what's going to happen is we're going to have to speak the truth in love. But before that, we're going to have to engage in perspective taking. Now, be warned, perspective taking comes with cost. It often makes us feel uncomfortable. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Anderson, who's going to talk about some of the dissonance we can feel as we do perspective taking. Dr. Anderson.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Tim. As you've heard, the purpose of this chapel is to set the stage for dialogue around topics that can be difficult to discuss in hopes of modeling well how to go about it. Why can we find it so difficult to listen to others whose viewpoint is different from our own? Why can the cost of engaging in this process feel too high? In the 1950s, a social psychologist by the name of Leon Festinger developed a theory to help answer these questions. It is a theory of cognitive dissonance. Festinger's theory suggests that human beings seek a harmonious inner world. When something upsets this harmony, like a new idea or an opinion, and we lose our internal psychological equilibrium, we become highly motivated to reduce the dissonance that results. Sometimes this dissonance is created because our belief and behavior don't match. Other times, it is when we have two conflicting thoughts about a topic. Let me give you an example of this from one of today's difficult issues: immigration. I completely understand why parents go to great lengths to immigrate to a country that offers a better life for their families. Not just better schools, food, and other resources, but a safer life where they can flourish. As a mom, I understand this at a visceral level. Wouldn't I do just about anything to provide a safe environment for my children, even if it meant skirting the legal system? Maybe, yes. To make it more personal, I have a beloved nephew-in-law who came to this country via Thailand in a boat with his parents and 4 siblings, one of whom died on the way. He is an educated, contributing member to this society, as are his siblings. I love him dearly. Okay, competing with this theoretical pondering in my own personal connection is the fact that I also believe laws are important for a healthy society. And there are laws that govern how people should enter our country. These laws exist for everyone's benefit and should be upheld. All citizens suffer if we show a blind eye to illegal behavior. We need to be selective about who is granted admission because we want to continue to have a safe and prosperous country. Now, let me make this even more complicated. DACA. Do we hold children responsible for their parents' illegal behavior? Should children born in the United States to illegal immigrants be forced to leave the only country they know for one they've never known? Okay, do you feel it? The tension rising, right? Are you going back and forth with yeah and yeah, okay? Some of you are thinking, make it stop. Remember the desired inner harmony I mentioned earlier? How do you find it in conversations such as this? One way is to say, it really doesn't matter. We don't have all the information, there's no way to resolve any of it, so we move on. This is akin to Aesop's fable about the fox that desperately tried to reach some grapes. After many failed attempts, he was really, really frustrated. So to lessen his frustration, he decided the grapes were probably sour anyway. Really not worth getting. Okay? That's how he handled the tension. Another way is to pick the side that is most congruent with our core beliefs and reject any new thought or belief that contradicts it. On the surface, this is a comfortable space to live in. Any conflicting feeling or thought is quickly discarded and harmony is restored. And to reinforce this position, a confirmation bias, another term out of social psychology, can develop. This is a tendency to interpret or favor information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. Maybe we stick to only one news source when we read the news, or only surround ourselves with people who think like we do. Confirmation of our beliefs makes our inner world congruent, more harmonious, but it means we never learn to live in the tension, have conversations that bother us, which could enlighten us and then challenge us to grow. In fact, reinforcing confirmation bias leaves us with a vague sense of dissatisfaction, a sense of something undone or unfulfilled. It's kind of like if you've ever been in an argument, maybe at the beginning of an argument with a partner, and you know things have been just really leading to this. Frustrations, little things, annoyances. You get to the place where you're going to have a conversation and you're going to go in. You're going to have, okay, now I'm really frustrated about this that's been going on and I want to talk. And your partner says, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, on one hand, it's nice to have your partner own that. On the other hand, it's really unsatisfying, isn't it? It's like I was all ready to go in. I need time to be angry. I get to have my angry spot, just let me do this. So there's a sense of it's just not satisfying to live in a world where we immediately shut down what is uncomfortable for us. So the question is, can we learn to live in the tension, the dissonance? Our hope is that in what we're proposing today, that we can learn how to do this together. I want to invite Dr. Langer up, who will talk about how we're going to move forward in this process.
Well, thank you. I'd like to talk just a few minutes about thinking Christianly about important issues. And there's some issues that are important in the sense that they define who we are. And in these areas, we have the Christian view. So, for example, these are things you may find embedded in things like the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed or confessional statements or things of that nature, where you say, no, there's a single Christian answer to this question, and it defines, in some sense, who we are. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have certain things on which we differ, and I think we could say we merely differ. For example, In-N-Out or fish tacos. It doesn't really matter, does it? There's no fish taco tribe. No one's running for president under the fish taco banner. And there's no Christian answer to the question whether you should eat it In-N-Out or have fish tacos. We don't even want to think of one of those things. These are areas in which we merely differ. So there's certain issues that define us, there's certain issues on which we merely differ, but there's a batch of other issues that we might say distinguish us. And these are issues that are truly important, so they aren't like fish tacos, but they're issues on which we genuinely disagree, so they hopefully are not like things on the Apostles' Creed. These are things that we look at and say, that's actually a significant issue, but there's multiple viewpoints that are possible. There isn't the Christian answer, there's a Christian answer, or a set of Christian answers. Paul wrote an entire chapter of the book of Romans about these issues, Romans 14. And he talks in this context about days and diets. Now for us, we may think these are fish taco-like issues. Who cares? Just remember, to a Jewish Christian at that time, there was nothing more important than days and diets. But Paul says, these issues, though important to you, are not actually the issues that define us. But the flip side is they aren't just trivial issues. So Paul says something really interesting. He says, about these issues, I want you to be fully convinced in your own mind. I want you to have a conviction. He doesn't want you to say, whatever. Whatever is an inappropriate response to an important issue. At some point, you have to decide, what do I actually think about this, and how will I then live? But here's the interesting thing. Paul says, there's no need for you to be fully convinced in someone else's mind, but rather in your own mind. And then he goes on to say, look, who are you to judge someone else? Because this person is going to stand before Jesus regarding their conviction. So he says, anything that doesn't proceed from faith is sin. I want you to be fully convinced in your own mind. And by the way, you're going to answer to Jesus for that conviction. But you're not going to answer to your next door neighbor, and you won't answer to your roommate. And the exhortation to the next door neighbor and the roommate is that we give each other space to live in these issues. So the interesting thing is, though the issues that define us, in one sense, are far more important, the issues that distinguish us are the ones that most commonly lead us to be angry and to fight with one another. It's these middle issues that are by far most problematic, because honestly, the issues that define us usually separate us. So we're not crossing those bridges all the time. And the issues on which we differ, we just differ, and we don't care that much about it. But these areas in the middle, we care an awful lot about. And it's these issues that we have to figure out a way to do what I call successfully disagree. I talk about achieving disagreement as a goal. And here's the tricky thing. It sounds like achieving disagreement is no problem. We shout at each other all the time, right? But here's the trick. Usually when two people say they disagree, they have not first succeeded in understanding each other. And I would like to argue you can't possibly disagree with someone until you are able to explain their position in a way they would look at you, nod their head, and say, yes, that's what I believe. Until you can describe their position accurately, you can't even disagree with it because you don't know what it is. So achieving disagreement is actually a bit of a feat. And that's what we hope to do here at Biola on April 9th. So on April 9th, we're going to invite two of our professors to come and have a constructive dialogue on some polarizing issues. So Darren Guerra, one of our political science professors, and Dr. Joy Qualls, one of our communication studies professors, will be coming together to have a discussion, in effect talking about how how we think our faith actually guides our political convictions. In other words, they'll be partly answering the question how I can be a perhaps left-leaning Christian or how I could be a right-leaning Christian. And they won't be talking about that in abstract, but they'll be talking about the actual issues that we face. They'll be discussing things like DACA and other issues like that. They'll be talking about why one of them perceives that the left-leaning perspective is a better way forward and is more representative perhaps of Christian conviction. And the other person will represent the opposite view of those issues. And we'll listen. And by the way, we're calling this a duologue, in part because Brian Shook has way too much time on his hands and he came up with this word. But it's also a handy word to distinguish it from a debate, because the goal of a debate is that if someone comes in leaning right, that they go out leaning left. The goal of a debate is to convert someone. Oftentimes at the end of the debate, you'll actually have a vote, and the audience will decide, quote, who won. The goal of a duologue is that those who walk in leaning right will walk out leaning right, but understand why someone might lean left. That's the goal, that you'll leave with a clearer understanding of why someone might think differently than you do. And hopefully a deeper appreciation of the gospel, because you'll see something of the richness of it as it's teased out into the honest challenges we face living out our faith in a fallen world. And so we are deeply grateful for Darren and Joy pioneering this process with us. Let me just say at the outset, achieving disagreement, having a good faculty disagreement, all these things, sounds really cool. Let me just be honest, we haven't done this before. And I don't know how it worked for you, like when you went out to play tennis and you'd never done it before, but it's possible it wasn't pretty. I can't guarantee how this process will go, but I can guarantee this: we want it to work. And if it doesn't work well the first time, there's going to be a second time, because we've got to figure out how to live together with the honest, well-intentioned, Christian-motivated disagreements that we have. So we invite you to join us in that process. Circle the date, April 9th on your calendar. Make plans to join us, and we hope it will be a delightful, interesting, intriguing, and perhaps sometimes disturbing time, but disturbing in a good way. So thanks, and let me invite President Corey to come back up to close us.
Christians have forgotten that the ministry of listening has been committed to them by the Lord, who himself is the great listener and whose work they should share. We should listen with the ears of God that we may speak the word of God. We have refreshments outside, as we do every community chapel, first Wednesday of the month. Please stand with me and hear the benediction from 1 Peter. But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Go in peace, you're dismissed.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.